Here we are, folks. So obviously we're going to start off with our, I suppose, least boiling hot topic 10. It's still pretty warm. And guys, I just want to remind you that if you're unsure about these topics, we have got those hot topics highlighted for you on the course page. You can study the entire thing. I will touch on areas of kind of teaching of these things, but what I want to do is develop exam skills. So what we're going to do here is highlight on the answer below where the student has given the two examples and then find two comparative statements. How do you know they're comparative? And the reason we're going to do this activity is look what this question says. It says state one example of an aerobic and one example of an anaerobic activity. So we've got to do this twice. So we're going to look for those. And over here, it's using these examples, compare aerobic and anaerobic exercise. So let's do the easy bit. An example of aerobic activity is long distance running. Now normally I would sort of highlight this in red to show it's going to get you a mark, but I'm just linking that to this requirement here. We have got an example of aerobic activity and it is long distance running. I suppose we could say marathon or even throw in triathlon or even do endurance swimming or open water swim. But look at the second answer. An example of an anaerobic is a 100-meter sprint. So nice and simple, nice and specific though. And I just want you to notice that the orange circles, orange squares I've just created relate to this, giving the two examples that we've got above. So obviously what we're going to find here, when you know what we would do traditionally marking this is we would circle this with red, we'd give it a tick and we'd give it a 1. And over here, we'd circle this, give it a tick and give it a 1. Obviously we've got 2 marks here, but the second thing I have to do is using these examples compare the two types, and this is different. We've got to make comparative statements. So what I want to do here is use a kind of blue. Look what I'm going to note. I'll read it out to you. I'm going to highlight one part. Long distance running, such as a marathon, there's our example from above, is mainly aerobic as it's performed at a moderate intensity, comma space whereas. Do you see how that comma space whereas is clearly forming a comparative statement? Long distance running is mainly aerobic, is performed at a moderate intensity, whereas 100-meter sprinting is high intensity. So what your marker would do, and by the way, they mark online these days. I mean, I'm doing it with a pen here, obviously. We've got moderate intensity compared to high intensity, and it's given with the examples we make, spectacles, and we'd get a mark for that. Now notice again, if I go back to my sort of blue highlighting, and that is my second comparison, another comparison is that marathon running is performed with the presence of oxygen, comma space, whereas 100-meter sprinting is without the presence of oxygen. Actually should be sufficient oxygen. I won't get into that now. Okay, so this is performed in the presence of oxygen, and the sprinting is without or in the absence of oxygen. We connect those two together. There's my mark, there's my 4, and there's my maximum in that particular case. Now, the reason I'm showing you this, guys, is not because I think you guys need me to tell you that oxygen plus glucose goes to, and I'll put carbon dioxide, I'll just write this, I won't use symbols for this, carbon dioxide and water. Okay, so you guys already know that. And you probably already know as well, we get energy released through aerobic respiration in that way. So I know you guys can do that, and you can do it the same with glucose goes to lactic acid plus a bit less energy release. I know you can do that. My question to you is, can you ensure for a topic that you understand that you get 4 marks in this particular case? And this compare skill is a really nice one. Now, you might be thinking, hang on, James, that's quite useful because I can use this in geography, in history, and whatever's in science. Blinking right, you can. There's loads of ways of writing whereas in the middle of compare sentences. You could write full stop in contrast comma. You could write, for example, full stop similarly comma if they got shared properties, but that's what we need you to do. Now, the other thing I want to do in this particular topic area is provide you what I would call this, I'm going to give this a name. This is called an automaticity table. What the hell does that mean? Guys, you can use this table here to practice question after question after question after question on aerobic and anaerobic respiration. What would you do? You would give an example of, which is state or identify, aerobic respiration. Okay, so you can just do that, or do it with anaerobic, or you can describe aerobic respiration in tennis. This is what this table is for. This is comparing let's say aerobic respiration in tennis and marathon running. Now, I think that would be a hard question, but you could give it a go. Or simply compare these two, which is what we've done. This table allows you to practice questions and therefore answers again and again and again and again and again. And teachers, I urge you to work with that automaticity table with your students and prep them as broadly as you can for answering those aerobic and anaerobic questions. Guys, that answer up there is a beaut. What would I do if I wanted to make what would I do if this were a 6 mark? It wouldn't have been, by the way, but it just happens to be an extra couple of marks. Or let's say that I didn't know this answer, so I couldn't give that one because I didn't know the answer. Could you see how I could say something? I'm just going to do this in a very simple way, but can you see how I would say marathon long duration, full stop, in contrast, comma, and I would say something like 100-meter sprinting short duration. Do you see how that would be another example of a comparative statement? Now, again, you wouldn't get this as a 6 markers because the 6 markers would incorporate paper 2 topic as well. But if I didn't know this answer here, if I didn't know that, I might need something else. There's another structure which is still comparative. Okay. We are making progress and we are officially warming up. Hot topic 8 already. So, fitness test, everyone's favourite, right? I bet you can't believe your luck. What have we got to do here? We get a lot of 1-mark questions with OCR GCSE PE, so sort of like our responsiveness and automaticity is really important. What should I notice here? What's the key thing for me to know? I've got to identify one of something, that's all right. But what I've got to do here is I've got to pick up, and I'll show you another example which is simpler. I've got to pick out this keyword here. This is about power. What test measures power? And this particular question has mentioned leg power. And of course here I'm going to refer to the vertical jump test. Now there are other tests, by the way. The vertical jump test. There are other tests that measure leg power. Now I'm actually not sure whether OCR would actually credit them, but that's the one that obviously we need to make sure that we mention on our course because that's the one that will be credited. This one here will get us a circle, it will get us a tick, and it will get us our 1 mark. And again, we're looking for Max. Hey Max, where are you, my fella? Max is there. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for Max. We're searching for Max. I could make a nice little pop tune about that. Maybe I will. Okay, this one I think is a little more intriguing. Calculate, okay, which sort of makes us feel like we're going to get the ruler out, right? But which performer has shown, this is the key word, the least improvement? If I pick up on that differently, most, some, other, middle, median, mean, we need the least improvement in their sit and reach. Can you notice how everyone can do addition and subtraction? So the person that loses the mark is the one that doesn't consider the question. So we got Vicky, she's got a difference of 7 centimeters. We've got Claudio, he's made a difference of 4 centimeters. We got Anita, she's gone nuts, she's got a difference of 9 centimeters. And Nelson, bless him, he's made progression of 3 centimeters from first test to second test. So what does that mean as our least progressed performer? Not surprisingly, it's Nelson. There we go. There's our Max for that question. Beautiful. So that's what we're looking at. Now, guys, there's not much for you to learn from me there. It's just really about me picking up on a bit of exam technique and making sure we're strong on that. Now, I'm going to choose a bit of a blue. No other reason. I quite fancy writing in blue for a bit. What we want to show here is the test that relates to a fitness component and which sport perhaps is most relevant to these tests and components of fitness. Now, we've already got our vertical jump test is really important for our power. So what sort of performers would this be most related to? Well, a classic example of power required in sport is athletics. And apart from your long distance stuff such as 10,000 meters, steeplechasing, athletics, the jumping, the throwing, the sprinting, that's all really power related. But we also find that when we talk about power, basketball is a good example. And why? Because it's got all of that rebounding and jumping high and quick movements. It's a nice one for you to consider. Let me go to a different colour. We'll go to green. Sit and reach test is for flexibility. We tend to find that people like dancers are really great to talk about here. Gymnasts. But I'm going to give you another one that you could use. Can you see how a hurdler, you could even say a high hurdler in men's hurdling, for example, that would be really interesting because you've got to have that real flexibility at the hip, at the back of the shoulders. So hurdlers are a really nice one for you to incorporate there if you're able to. Let me go into some sort of crimson. The Illinois test, well, of course, that's an agility test, which is why it's called the Illinois agility test. Who might we be referring to? Well, games players in general here. But we find that tennis is a really nice one for you to incorporate for agility. That's something that you can consider. Obviously, use other examples that you prefer by all means, but these are nice ones. Okay, we've got a gymnast, a surfer, and a cyclist. What are we talking about here with the fitness component? We are talking here, it could be many things, but we're looking for balance. Look how they've got to be balanced. They've got to be balanced. And obviously, a cyclist has got to stay on the wheels, right? There's other sports that have balance, of course, they almost all do. What test do we have? We have our old famous stork standing test. I saw some storks last summer in France. Do you know the size of them birds? They are whopping. Anyway, that's a whole other conversation. Stork standing test for balance. Great examples here. I don't know if it's just me, but every time I see the word cricketer, I see the city of Chichester. I've obviously got something going on with my interpretation of the word cricketer, but when I see it, it always says the word Chichester's a city on the south coast. Whenever I see the word cricketer, my mind reads Chichester. Don't know why I'm telling you this, but cricketers need coordination as many other types of performers. Who would this, or what sort of test would this be? We would use, obviously, our wall throw test. Now, one of the things we want you to be aware of with our testing protocols, folks, is you must have a good awareness of the actual protocols of those things. So this one's an interesting one. This question is actually a past paper question. The diagram shows the Illinois agility test setup. Agreed. The arrows show the direction from the start to the first cone. Complete the diagram to show the rest of the route. So what's going to happen here, folks, is you see here, I've got a route that's sort of plotted for me, right? Now, before I actually plot this out, I actually know what the next cone is going to be. The next question is going to be. It's going to ask me distances, okay? So I just want to remind myself that this here, from there to there, is 10 meters. And that'll become useful for me in a second. But my performer, they're going to go round here. They're going to come down here, they're going to go round here, they're going to go round here, they're going to go round here. I hope I've got this right. Round here, round here, round here. They now come up this way, back round this cone, and of course they finish down here at the finish line. So I would, obviously, I've just sort of sketched that out in a very, very scruffy way. Can I stress to you, if you were doing that for real, you would be doing a very, very clear line to make sure that there's no ambiguity. It would be like this, okay? So you would be doing it like this, making sure that you show the exact route way for this performer and finish down here with a nice good quality arrow. So that's what we want to do here. This one's an interesting one though, because it's asking me how far has this person gone. Now, the little trick with this one, folks, is we wouldn't really consider like lateral movement in this sense. So they've gone up and down this 10-meter length 4 times. So it's 10 times 4, which is going to give us 40 meters. Now, I know someone out there is going to say, hey, Jimbo, it's more than that because they've zigzagged. I know, right? But we consider it to be a 40 meters or approximately a 40-meter test. And if you think about that, guys, it's quite interesting because if you think that, I suppose, what's an average time for this? You might find that people are between maybe 15 seconds to 20-ish seconds. That's quite interesting because, of course, it shows us that this type of agility, if you imagine what people would run 40 meters in a straight line like, if you started here and you had 40 meters to run, so this was 0 and this was 40 meters over here, what would the average people do that in? I've never actually measured. I'm going to say something like 6 to 8 seconds would not be unusual. But can you see how that agility is so much different? But effectively we're doubling and a bit more that time, aren't we? Because these change of directions. So it actually shows the very clear distinction between agility versus speed. Now, obviously, they are different by definition, but I think actually the testing protocols highlight that a little bit, but we need to know test protocols for our test. And of course, I urge every student and every teacher to go across all the test protocols for this course and make sure you know them inside out. Again, the tutorials we've got on the platform will take you through each and every one of them. Okay, we are getting warm, folks. Topic 6, injury prevention, everyone's favourite, obviously. So let's just look at our command. We're identifying two of something. And we're looking at ways to minimise the risk of injury in sport, giving an example of each. Now, guys, this is the important thing here. Giving a sporting example of each. I must do that, otherwise I get no mark. Okay, so let's see if I'm going to do this appropriately. So I've got, and I need 4 marks. One way to minimise the risk of injury. Now, guys, I've got to say, I'm not sure if we need that sort of sentence, but I'm going to use a different colour here. I'll just use my blue so you can see it. Is through the use of PPE. Okay, through the use of PPE, personal protective equipment. And then look here, an example of PPE is what? A cricketer from Chichester, a cricketer wearing a helmet. Okay, wearing a helmet. And of course, I could say to protect their head from a fast pitch ball or something like that. But notice what I've got there, folks. I have got the idea of saying there is the factor. That's the way. And I've got that wearing a helmet in cricket. If I just said wearing a helmet, let's say I hadn't said that, this bit here would be vague. Okay, but because I've said a cricketer wearing a helmet, or it could be a snowboarder, I suppose, I get my mark, and there we go. Have a look at my second one here, folks. Go back to the blue pen again. A second way to minimise the risk of injury is what? I'm going to put here wearing correct, or the correct footwear. Wearing the correct footwear, let's say. And I must give my example. So an example of this is wearing, and I'm going to be specific. I want to make sure I don't leave room for vagueness. Wearing spiked athletics, so there's my sport, athletic shoes. Where would we tend to use these? On a track. I suppose I could have said cross-country shoes, I suppose. To minimise the chances of falling, slipping, that kind of thing. The chances of falling. Guys, again, can we stress here, going back to red penness? I'm going to not say that again. Correct footwear. Sorry. Wearing spiked athletic shoes. That's my key thing there. Notice I've given a sport. If I just said, do you see how? Imagine I hadn't said the word athletics. Do I give, maybe my marker would still mark it correct. Maybe they would give me the benefit of the doubt, right? But because I hadn't said athletics, do you see how I might get another vague there? Why? Because I've not given a sporting example. I've just given spiked shoes. No, we've got to say athletics. We've got to say, I suppose it could be golfing. It could be, whatever, or studied football boots, rugby boots, whatever. Specialist astro trainers for hockey players. But for that reason, I get my 1, I get my max. And guys, those exam techniques, show you know. Show you can. Don't leave information and knowledge in your head. Get it on that bit of paper. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit heated here. Okay, so we've got here, identify and describe the main commands here. So we're going to fill out the table. What do we have for PPE? Well, let's go for, we've got the one we've got already, right? Helmet in cricket. And you could go on to the impact of that. Pardon the pun. Which is it protects the head from fast-pitched, fast bowling, or something, bodyline bowling, something like that. What about correct footwear and clothing? What we've got our spikes. We've got here. I'll put this one in here. I'm going to say astro trainers for hockey. To prevent slipping on, burning one's knees on the astroturf or something like that. But also, notice you have clothing. I could put something like wicking clothing to keep a marathon runner cool during a long distance run or something like that. So, lots of options that you've got, but that's the one I'm going to go for. Appropriate level of competition. I'm going to go here for age-based segregation. That's a big word, isn't it? Segregation. That feels very serious, and I suppose rightly so. Age-based segregation, such as under 14s and under 60s. Now again, I could say why. I could say so it's prevent, on average larger performers, perhaps tackling on average smaller performers, or the forces involved, that kind of thing. Use of warm up and cool down. So what might I put here as my example? I'm going to say here team. You don't need to use other colours, by the way. Team warm up and cool down. And what I'm going to say here, before and after a football match. Okay, could be anything, could be netball, could be hockey, doesn't matter. But because I've given my sporting example now of a team warm-up, that's what I've done there, team warm-up, football match, okay? So I'm leaving my examiner in no question whatsoever that I'm doing that. And again here, lifting and carrying equipment safely, what would perhaps be my description of this thing? I'm going to say here, a goalkeeper, a GK, bends their knees, and not their back, so bends their knees and not their back when moving the net post. So this is in netball, when moving the net post. So it's not so much in the performance, but you see here, perhaps before training, after training, the goalkeeper has got a tendency to move the net post into position because it's sort of near their playing area. Therefore, they're going to obviously, try and do that in the right way. And that's how we take our identification over to an example-based description. Remember what I said before, guys? We've got to be prepared to identify, in this case, injury prevention methodologies, and describe them using examples. Okay, so hopefully those are good things. Now, here I'm going to say describe how appropriate level of competition can minimize the risk of injury in association football. In fact, let me see if I can actually change my canvas while you're watching me, and I'll see if I can bring it to you very, very rapidly. So we'll go to actual size. Guys, here's my answer in here. Let's just mark it, as I normally pause at that part. But have a look here. Football is typically played in age-restricted categories until players are adults. So we've got age-restricted categories. So there's going to be my 1 mark for that. This is to ensure that on average, larger and strong players don't compete with potentially injure smaller, lighter players on average. Okay? So that's how it would be done. Here, furthermore, teams of all ages are often streamed into first team and second team. So I've got now first team and second team based on the intensity of their play. And that's why we would do that. Okay, and perhaps if that was a 4 marker, we would get us our max in that particular case, guys. So this one here, describe ways to minimize the risk of injury in rugby union. I'm just going to sort of bullet point this out, but can you see how I might go for something like PPE? Okay, I might then go for something like gum shield, and I would say why. I would say what would happen here. So I would be saying something like, okay, I would like this to be prevent damage to the teeth. Okay, so prevent damage to teeth. And I would say, during collision or during a tackle, or it could even be something accidental, right? I could say during accidental head collision. So that would be like my first point. Let's go for a different one. I'm going to go for footwear. That's meant to be a different color. I'm going to go for footwear. It's still meant to be a different color. There we go, footwear. So I'm going to say they're going to wear studded boots. Studded, I'll just put studded for obvious reasons, and I'm going to say here prevent slipping, which of course could be the thing that creates the collision, right? Prevent slipping, gee whiz, slipping, not sligging. I don't know what to slig means. It's a good verb. I might look that up later. And then finally, guys, I might say something like age-related. That will actually be the second bit, but we've got segregation, age-related. So I'm going to say that we play under 18s separately from adults. And why? It's ultimately to prevent injury, right? To prevent inappropriate, I suppose in this case, scale people, tackling potentially smaller people, so preventing injury. But can you see how I need to go through that full rhythm of making sure I get my point down? Now, obviously, I've just bullet pointed that. Can I stress to you, you will not write your answer in this format. Okay, you will write this out in prose. Teachers out there might be asking me the question of, James, do you ever get your students to bullet point their answers? I don't personally. I'm a strong believer that by the age of 16, students should be writing really confidently in prose. Now, there might be some exceptions to that, but that's my particular opinion. And I mean, you can disagree with my opinion, that's fine. But I consider it my job to be developing that prose-based writing with students as much as I possibly can as the knock-on educational aspect of the course we're working with. Anyway, I'll stop going on about that for now.